Hi everyone, I'm filming in my bedroom today. I just wanted to maybe have a bit of a spiritual ramble today because I feel like I haven't really managed to get very in-depth with anything in the last couple of months anytime I've done videos, but there have been a couple of things that have been bubbling away in the back of my head, I suppose, spiritually, that I haven't really had a chance to delve into in any great detail. So I've already mentioned that my spiritual practice has changed since I came to Edinburgh. But I think in a broader sense, in a wider sense, I'm probably undergoing the most serious spiritual crisis that I've had since I returned to my spiritual practice in about 2011 or 2012. And I really think that the only reason for this, I think the reasons are twofold. I think first of all it has been lack of time. And I think it really is just because I've been exercising my mind, my intellect so much with this master's that there hasn't been so much room left for curiosity about my spiritual life, because all of that sort of like curious energy has been taken up with the master's. So I think it was kind of firstly just a lack of time and lack of energy due to doing the master's. But secondly, I think sadly, coming here to Edinburgh, and I have mentioned this in a couple of videos before as well, coming here to Edinburgh to study religion, you would think that if you're studying religion that it would support your religious practice, and in fact I found the opposite. Because I'm not doing theology or philosophy of religion, because I'm doing religious studies, which is, especially in Edinburgh, highly sociological, it's actually been the opposite. I'm surrounded all the time by people who are atheists and who assume that I'm an atheist, and by scholars who are coming from an atheistic, or at least a very kind of objective agnostic perspective. And it's quite difficult to escape that. It's actually quite difficult, I find, to put all of that sociological research and analysis of religion in one box, and then yet, you know, be kind of playing with the toys of spirituality out of the other box at the same time. And maybe it's just been the combination of those two things that has resulted in this kind of spiritual crisis, because if I had more space, kind of more energy, more time to be maintaining a more dedicated spiritual practice, then I think, as I've said before, I think spirituality, religion, it really is kind of like a muscle in your mind. Like, you have to exercise it, and the more you exercise it, the more you feel it. The more you entrain that tendency, that habit of feeling spiritual, the more it kind of develops and evolves. And that was very much the case for me before, especially when I finished working in my old workplace, which was kind of dragging me down a bit, and I was just spending all of my time working on Heart Story and so on. I actually entered a phase of my life where I felt the most religious, the most devout that I have ever felt, and I even entered a phase of where I was not only a pantheist, not only a polytheist, in that I was working with individual deities and in a largely as kind of archetypes or metaphors, but also I entered a phase for the first time in my life of being either agnostic or monotheistic. Well, maybe monotheistic is, or theistic, I suppose, is a term I'm trying to think of, rather than monotheistic. I think that's too specific. But I entered, for the first time in my life, I felt as though I was starting to have faith in some sort of higher divine power that might, you know, that I was agnostic about what that might look like, how it might behave, how that might work, how it might interact with me, and how I might connect with it. And I think I definitely have made videos about that, and I might link one below in particular that I made about, it was called Beyond the Universe or something. And I definitely have carried some of that with me, but I look back now at when I was arriving here in September, and I just had this kind of level of faith in, say, the feeling that I was, I mean, you can watch my being led by the Morrigan or guided by the Morrigan video just to see the kind of place that I was in September and October when I first arrived here, in terms of just feeling that there was maybe some element of divine guidance, feeling very strongly that the Morrigan whatever I decide intellectually that she is, but this very strong belief that she was playing a part in my life, that she had a role in my life, that she was guiding me, that she was very much there, she was very present and powerful. And sure, my interpretations of what the Morrigan is and what that actually constituted in a scientific sense might be different to some other pagans, but it was still very real for me, and that has really slipped away for me in the 9 months that kind of followed. So one of the things I've been trying to cultivate while getting back into my meditative practice is kind of a habit of thinking and feeling spiritually again. And just as a little side kind of life update, I will indeed be going ahead to my doctoral research in September, or well, sometime in the autumn. I will be starting my PhD, and it's becoming very important for me now to adjust my research focus and my research question and the way in which I approach the sociological research to my religious beliefs and my spiritual experiences and that kind of thing, and to kind of maybe cater it more towards my interests, which is something that I feel like maybe I lost sight of at some point during the Masters. I've ended up now writing a Master's dissertation that is interesting, but I feel like I'm not really getting at what it is that I'm really interested in. I'm kind of going off the topic that I wanted to talk about here. I wanted to talk more explicitly about spirituality and religion and you know, my religious experience and how things are going to be moving forward for me. But I suppose that is one aspect of it, and that's a topic that's come up a little bit in the Pagan on YouTube community recently, the spiritual and the mundane, and how you kind of intertwine those two aspects of your life. And I suppose it's become clear to me that my spirituality and my academic research are actually going to be two very separate things, but B, because they are so innately separated, I need to find ways of crossing them over a little in a way that feels more comfortable for me, in a way that means that I, you know, don't lose sight of why it was that I came here in the first place and what it is that interests me about paganism and worship of the Morrigan and those things that I am actually doing my research on. I will be doing research on the Morrigan, worship of the Morrigan, online representations of worship of the Morrigan primarily. What I want to be touching on with that is maybe something a little bit broader than just the sociological picture of that. I want to get a little bit deeper into questions of why and how and the meaning behind it for the individuals and so on. I think I just want to scratch the surface a little bit more than I think your average religious studies researcher actually does. So moving on from that, I wanted to talk a little bit about ritual and the Wheel of the Year. I kind of went through, I think the last Wheel of the Year that I went through before I came to Edinburgh, ritual just was not really working for me. I was still pushing myself to do something very similar to what I had done for the first two iterations of the Wheel of the Year, when I was sort of establishing myself as a spiritual person. I was still kind of pushing myself to do the same thing, and that really wasn't working for me. And I think if you watch a lot of my vlogs, my Wheel of the Year vlogs, that will be very evident from how I talk and what I'm saying every time, kind of saying, oh, I haven't had the chance to really plan as much as I would have wanted to like orchestrate some elaborate ritual. I'm just going to sit down with my thing from last year, and it's just not what I necessarily expected myself to be doing. And then this time, or this kind of go around of the Wheel of the Year, I let go of those expectations of myself, because I knew I had very little time in Edinburgh, you know, to be orchestrating those elaborate rituals. And I've just been kind of allowing that. I've been allowing myself to do very pared back ritual. And I found that actually I haven't missed a single Sabbath, which surprises me a little bit. I kind of thought that maybe I would miss them. But I've even just said to myself, well, look, you know, I'm just going to sit down at the altar. And you know what? Some of those just sitting down at the altar experiences have been more profound than anything I've experienced in sacred space for several years. And I think that's been very telling. I think I listen to other people talking about kind of elaborate ritual, you know, not necessarily about the detail of their elaborate ritual, but just about planning elaborate ritual in advance and writing poetry for it, and you know, having it all laid out and writing about it and just doing all this planning and thinking about it beforehand. And I think that sounds very attractive to me. That sounds really good. It sounds like something that I want to be doing. But I think when it comes down to it, it's not something that actually, it's clearly not as important to me as I think it is, because otherwise I would be doing it. Otherwise I would be making the time. And I think primarily now when it comes to Sabbats, two things have been happening for me. Getting out into nature hasn't really worked, didn't really work for the first kind of 6 or so, because I just don't have a car here and it's just difficult for me. But allowing myself to just sit down at the altar on the designated day and just do whatever it is that I feel like doing. And I have been kind of getting into a certain pattern of a repetitious ritual. Like I do have certain kind of prayers or words of reverence that I do speak. And like kind of every time, and I've been paring it down and getting it to a point where it really feels like everything that I'm saying and doing as part of setting up that sacred space is actually relevant and resonates with me and feels meaningful and doesn't feel just empty or hollow. But then in terms of just any actual ritual, fancy ritual actions at the centre of the ritual, I've kind of done away with that, and I found that it's not necessary. It's not, sometimes just burning some incense and being at the altar and doing some astral travel in the way that I understand it, sort of active imagination, allowing that to come over me and not trying to be too rigid about it has actually worked out much better. So, but I also feel like ritual is something that is important to me, and I do want to think about it, and I want to see where it is that I'm going wrong. If constructing an elaborate different ritual for every Sabbat isn't the way for me, then what is the way for me? What is it that I need to be focusing on? And doing active imagination, or what other people would understand maybe as astral travel, is something that has been very important for me before, and it is something that really roots me in my spirituality and really makes me feel connected to the divine. So that's something that I maybe should be focusing on, for example. And I've been playing around with ideas of doing more frequent small devotionals and things like that, and kind of getting away from this idea that when the Sabbath comes around that there has to be some big elaborate ritual, and instead maybe saying to myself, well, maybe I'll do kind of weekly, very much smaller rituals, weekly devotionals to the Morrigan, and kind of maybe turn that into a little ritual in and of itself, and do some active imagination during that time. I think I'll just call it astral travel, because if I remember to link all these videos below, I will. I made a video on kind of astral travel, I think, and what that actually, how I understand that to work, and I might link that below. I'm pretty sure I did that. It was like pantheism and astral travel, or I can't remember. So that's something that I've been thinking about, and I'm really just sharing this because it's helpful to me to like work these things through my head, but also just in case any of this is helpful to any of you, that if any of you are kind of going through something similar, or just to remind you that I think just because you see somebody else doing something and it sounds really good and you really want to be doing that, doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually what is going to work for you in practice. And I think maybe we all need to be a little bit more open-minded sometimes about exactly what it is that is going to work best for us, is going to make us have the kind of spiritual experience and spiritual feeling that we're looking for. I'm trying to be a bit more flexible about that now, and part of that is being more flexible about the Wheel of the Year. One of the things that's been working very well for me is that for the last two, for Bealtaine and Midsummer, I've actually ended up celebrating with other people, primarily with my girlfriend, and that has actually been more moving and more it's just been what I need, I think, in recent times. And I don't know if that's the kind of thing that you can always, I think it has to be organic. So for example, for Bealtaine, we went to the Beltane Fire Festival on Calton Hill in Edinburgh, which is something I'd been planning for a long time. So that happened on the actual eve of Bealtaine. But then I had also decided that from now on, the way I'm going to work that is that the 31st of, is it the 30th or 31st? I can never remember, of April, and then the 31st of July, etc. for Lunasa, 31st of January, are going to be when I kind of do my socially oriented kind of ritual experiences, like celebrations, festivities, because my birthday is on the 31st of October, so it kind of works. And actually my girlfriend's birthday, as it happens, is on the 31st of January, so that's already two of them where there's kind of birthday celebrations that want to be happening, and then there's a Beltane Fire Festival that I want to be going to, so it really has turned out to make a lot of sense for me to do it that way. And then what I do is on the actual cross quarter between the solstice and the equinox, then I will actually do ritual. So on, on the actual day where it's midway between the two. And I did that, I did ritual on Bealtaine, but you know what, like I allowed it to be organic and it was meaningful and it was lovely, but the most kind of, I think the most profound spiritual moments for me were actually, at the Beltane Fire Festival itself. And then after that, for the summer solstice, my girlfriend Katie was going, she was going away a couple of days later, she was going back to Ireland. And so I didn't want to be taking up the whole evening just doing, my own ritual. I think it was our last night together actually before she left. And I didn't want to be taking up the whole evening doing, ritual by myself. And I just suddenly, and it was the full moon. I just suddenly had this idea of like, why don't we go up Calton Hill and watch the moon rise, watch the sunset. And the moment of the solstice was actually just a little bit after sunset, I think, something like that. And that turned out to be just the most, one of the most profound kind of spiritual experiences I've had in a long time. Now, Katie isn't, she's not pagan, she's very interested in all the kind of stuff that I'm interested in. She's very interested in paganism, in mythology, in the occult, in witchcraft, in all things weird and spooky. But she herself isn't interested in practicing in that way. She's sort of, you could say that she's vaguely Christian, she likes Jesus without the dogma, and she kind of has quite a vague belief in some form of divinity and some form of soul and that kind of thing. So while she's not actually overtly practicing alongside with me, she has really enjoyed kind of coming along with me and doing these things and having those meaningful moments with me, in a way that maybe some people who aren't spiritually inclined at all would maybe not be fully there with me in that experience, if you know what I mean. So it's nice to have somebody along with me who is fully there, like I say, in that moment, in that experience, and is kind of fully tapped into the relevance and just the importance of that moment. We had an interesting experience actually on Calton Hill. There were various people kind of coming and going. It was fairly busy up there, people watching the sunset and so on. And then one guy kind of came up onto the kind of plinth, like the monument thing up there, and kind of gave us this really weird look. He looked like very spaced out, like he was definitely on some sort of drugs, and we were kind of having a bit of a chat about him and saying like that he gave us a really weird look. And what was that look? Because it was just a strange look that we kind of couldn't put our finger on what the emotion was behind the look, if you know what I mean. He looked sort of surprised, but in a weird way. And we were just kind of commenting on that, and I was saying he looked like he was on shrooms or whatever, and he was kind of wandering around by himself. He looked very happy, and there was just something about him that kind of caught our attention. And then he was kind of just wandering back and forth. He was wandering around doing his thing, and we noticed at one point that he was picking up bottles that people had left because the people were drinking up there. And we were quite touched by that, like we quite liked that. We were like, oh, what's he doing with the bottles? And then he brought them over to the bin. We were like, oh, that's nice. And then I think we noticed him kind of going over to a tree, and he was like climbing the tree and things like that, and I kind of started to say, just from the way he was dressed and from the way he was behaving, I was kind of saying, I think he's a pagan, I think he's up here for the solstice, that kind of thing. And then we heard this chanting, and it sounded like several voices, and Katie was like, what's that? Slightly like spooked, and I was like, oh, it's probably a group of pagans, like, we're up here, it's the solstice, there's a full moon, and everything's very, very witchy altogether. There's probably a group of pagans somewhere on the hill. And then it kind of stopped almost immediately, and we were like, that was strange. And then this guy appeared kind of I think he had been up on the it's like a copy of the front of the Parthenon in Athens. He had been up on that, and he'd kind of gotten down, and he was walking along the grass, and he was chanting, and we looked at each other and we were like, it sounded like multiple voices. He was, I mean, when I say chanting, he was sort of, it sounded like Gregorian chant or something actually. I'm not exactly sure what he was singing. And we were looking at each other going, it sounded like multiple voices, like that was crazy. He was saying, well, maybe it was just echoing between the pillars or something. And he was just walking along, and when we spotted him walking along, he had, like, no joke, he had this, on a stick on his shoulder, he had a bag, like a cloth bag tied on a stick on his shoulder, and he was just kind of like wandering across the green, and I just kind of like grabbed Katie's hand and was like, oh my god, like, if he had a dog, he would be the fool. Like, he just looks like the fool. And she knows enough about tarot to know what I meant, and also to kind of appreciate the relevance of, you know, the Fool and the Solstice and stuff, and we were both kind of going, wow, that's really cool. And then he kind of wandered around a little bit more, and then at one point he appeared, he was barefoot at that point, and at one point he appeared again, and this time I think he was wearing his shoes again. It was clear that he was leaving. He was heading towards the path to kind of leave the park, to leave the hill. And we were kind of watching him go with his sack on the stick on his shoulder, and just as he walked, he kind of walked in front of a street lamp. There were like lamps up there, and I don't know how it was just some way that the light kind of cast his shadow on a stone, but the shadow just ran along the ground beside him, and it looked, I could have sworn in that moment that it was a kind of a medium-sized black dog kind of running from the opposite direction to join him, to like run alongside his heels. And both of us saw it, and saw it as the same thing, saw it as a dog, and both kind of gasped and looked at each other, and we were like, it was a shadow, it wasn't a dog, but it was just, and then he kind of disappeared and we never saw him again. And it was just one of those moments of, it was just so perfect to kind of encounter the Fool on Calton Hill on the summer solstice. You know, with the full moon kind of rising above Arthur's seat in front of us. It was really, really magical, and it was the kind of experience that I couldn't have had in front of my altar, and also I think that was enhanced by being there with her rather than being by myself, which was an interesting experience for me. And you know, I've had very little kind of group spiritual experience, so that's been quite nice. I'll leave it there, and I hope you're all really well, and I'll talk to you again soon.